Welcome to this webinar on human centricity of R&D and innovation policies run by the ERA Fabric project. My name is Dag Håkon Hanberg from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, Norway. And also organizing this webinars is Asa Mallon and Elisa Sitanti from Trondheim Tech Port in Norway as well. And we are very lucky to have three excellent speakers here in this webinar with each of their interesting topics to present to you today. So I'll go briefly through the speakers and also the topics of the presentations. So first today we'll have Johannes Riegler. He is a stakeholder involvement officer at the Austrian Research Promotion Agency and also member of the management board and driving urban transitions, DUT. And within DUT, he designs and leads multi-actor processes, uniting researchers, urban administrators, and change makers to foster collaboration, knowledge exchange, and co-creation for regenerative livable cities. So Johannes will be the first speaker today. And after that, we'll have Chiara Fonio. She is head of social innovation at Icons, where she leads social engagement strategies, develop key performance indicators, and oversees the monitoring and assessment of engagement activities in EU-funded projects. And she also has extensive experience with EU-funded research projects, focusing on surveillance, security, and innovation in crisis management. So she'll be the second speaker today. And then we have John Dare. He's the director of the Research and Enterprise Directorate at City University of London, and is also a board member of the European Alliance for Social Sciences and Humanities. And he's also vastly experienced in EU research policy, science policy, as well as strategic planning and research development. So those are the three speakers that we're here from today. We'll start, as I mentioned, with Johannes. After that, I'll just like to mention to you, we'll have a Q&A session that you might have seen in the agenda. And there is the opportunity for all of you, the audience, to ask questions. So please, while you're enjoying the presentations, also note down questions that you have for the three speakers. But first, Johannes, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Doug. Sorry for the nice introduction. I will share my screen with you. I have a couple of slides. Does it work? You can see it? Yes, thank you. Yes, thanks for the nice introduction. I'm Johannes. I'm part of the management team of the Driving Urban Transition Partnership, which is a research and innovation program. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit on how we in the research or in this program think that we need to design research and innovation significantly different if we want to address, let's say, the challenges of today. So the Driving Urban Transition Partnership, it's a public-private partnership on research and innovation for urban transition. So in total, we have 65 members or 65 partners from 28 European countries. So these are mainly funding agencies and ministries. You can see a couple of countries from outside of Europe on the map as well. So these are occasionally participating in our calls. And we have three topics in DUT. That is the circular urban economies that brings together also nature-based solutions and of course circular urban economies, but it's a bit of a it's a container for greening, circular economy, and so on. We have positive energy districts, which focuses more on the energy side of things. What do you need? How do you need to design urban neighborhoods in order that they are not only energy consuming, but also producing? There's a lot of questions about that. And the 50-minute city, which links a lot to public space, mobility patterns, and so on. 1 second. So my first key message for today would be that supporting transformative urban research innovation requires really reimagining what research and innovation funding is. Because we cannot only, from a programming level, we cannot just ask projects to do things differently, to address the challenges of today, without challenging how we work. And this is something very important, but also very difficult to do in a program, because there's a history of why the patterns, or why the structures, the funding frameworks are in place, and breaking that up is not an easy task. We try to do that. We're not there yet, but we continue to improve. And I'll just tell you a couple of things on how we do that in driving urban transitions. So one is by having different requirements for our calls. So we really encourage local public administrations and other urban actors to be part of our projects. This is from the first call. So we have 48 projects funded, and as you can see here, we only have 31% universities and other educational institutions, and a lot of other actors which have a stake in urbanism, let's say it like this. We have 26% city authorities, which is great, and but still we might want to enhance that in the future. We also work with the project, so we are not only funding them and off they go and produce something nice and come back at the end of it, but we want to have this community of projects. We have a city panel where we bring together city administration to reflect, on the one hand side, results with us, but also generate strategic insight on what we can do, what topics we put forward and invest in. We have the Agora, that's our stakeholder platform, where we really bring together all different kind of urban actors to have strategic discussions, where we then identify where we need to put our money to have an impact in our cities, or to build a network for exchange and future projects. We also engage in policy discussions. And something I'm gonna focus on today, that is our urban doers community, because it's something very new. It is something we developed over a couple of years. It's very difficult to get that implemented in a European framework, because it doesn't fall under a usual, let's say, headline. What it is a small-scale grant system, community system, or support framework, not system, which aims at mobilizing local knowledges and experiences, which is there in the cities. So you see all the urban doers which we have had in the first runoff and in the first community in the back. These are local initiatives, neighborhood initiatives, small, medium, or micro businesses which do something extremely interesting and have a knowledge on, let's say, urban transformations, but are not necessarily connected to European level, because they act on a very local level. So why we thought that this is needed is twofold. These communities, or these urban doers, they don't have networks on a European scale. They cannot play the European game of research and innovation, because their organization, their funding methods work completely different than European funding in research and innovation. So this is something we want to bridge the gap, build the capacities for them to be part of the game, and at the same time identify how we, on a program level, what do we need to change to make it attractive to them. I show you a little bit of or I show you a video which gives you a little bit of a flavor of what these urban doers are and how they work and what their impact on the cities actually is.
Energy poverty is a big problem in Europe, and in our project we have specifically developed strategies to engage energy poor families, so they can become members of the energy community without paying the entrance fee for the installation of solar panels.
And we are looking at how to use the waste, for example, from oysters, shells, or these types of materials, which combine with, for example, recycled concrete. We can create a very durable material, very resistant, and we can actually use it in new designs.
We managed to changed city a lot for the better. There are more cyclists in the city and people started to use bicycles as their everyday mode of transport. For example, there is one main street and main bridge which was pedestrianized. So before it was like 20,000 cars per day on that section, and now it's totally car-free.
We created these participatory initiatives where everybody can actually say what are their needs and what...
Oh, sorry.
To some degree, actually.
Sorry, that was my bad. I shouldn't use the mouse while the video is playing. I just learned that.
Process.
Our project has to do with urban planning and superblocks and transforming our neighborhoods, making more space for people to live in the public space, for kids to play, for more trees to be planted, and a lot more, actually. We actually bring really new ideas and a really engaged neighborhood. So if they actually build something in the neighborhood is already engaged, they already know about it, they know it comes from them. With the workshops, it's their designs to some degree, and there's more acceptance like this.
From the European law, we know it's possible to create renewable energy communities, to produce and share energy locally between citizens, local NGOs and the local governments. So this is possible and it's being transposed to all member states. Our project shows that it can be done on the ground by citizens, with citizens and for citizens. And through this 10-step approach that we are developing, everyone can do it.
What the city has gained, like the planning department, we have made a really comprehensive workshop series that redesigns the entire neighborhood, and it's for them to take, like we did a lot of the work for free, they just have to do it now.
We are now 10 years in the city council with 1 or 2 members in the city council. We actually were there every year when the financial plan for the city was proposed. We came with the ideas what should be financed for better improvement of the cyclists, and also we were part of long-term strategies.
Yes, before I think Elisa is about to gong the gong very soon. Just to give you a bit of an idea, we also this community produced a policy paper for policymakers on a European level, from European to local level. So if you want to have a look at it, please you find the QR code here. But this is an example of how we want to connect the very local level with European policy via a research innovation framework. And for me, I would put forward the following conclusions: that it requires human-centered approaches, require new formats beyond the business as usual in research and innovation programming. The local and human-centered knowledge and experiences is out there. We need to somehow find these methods to mobilize it, to connect it to a European level and make it useful, this synthesis of knowledge. And for tackling societal challenges in the 2020s, if we really want to do that with research and innovation, we just simply cannot afford to not make use of this knowledge and this, let's say, niche innovation, which is in our neighborhoods out there. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Johannes, for a very nice presentation. Just to remind everyone here in the audience that if you have questions to what Johannes just presented, please note them down for the Q&A session later on. Next up on stage, our virtual stage here on Zoom, is Chiara Fonio. She's going to talk about the significance of human-centric frameworks in research and innovation. So please, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Doug. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me first. It's a real pleasure to be here with you this morning and to share some insights on the human-centric approach. Before I share the screen, I should start by saying that actually my presentation is very much aligned with what Johannes just said in his presentation, and especially as far as the conclusions are concerned. So I will now share my screen so that you can see my presentation. Just a second. Yeah. Okay, can you see my screen?
Maybe soon. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Chiara Fonio. As I said before, I'm the head of social innovation at ICONS. So first, I will shortly touch upon about who we are, and then I will take a deep dive into what we do and how we approach human-centric frameworks within the context of EU-funded projects. So ICONS is a non-profit organization. The mission of ICONS is to really increase the impact of research on society. And the ambition is to make European science and especially innovation really understandable, relevant, and accessible to all. Here you can see you have just a few information about who we are and what we do. The headquarters are in Italy. We are currently involved in 80 EU-funded projects. We are 100 people, and we are the third organization in the Lombardy region by number of Horizon Europe projects. The project areas that we cover are really a lot. So here you can see just some examples of topics that we are working on. So from smart cities to circular economy to health, environment and climate, bioeconomy, and so forth and so on. And if you are curious about knowing more, you can have a look at our website and scroll through the references. So here you can see the social innovation team, which is here. So my team is currently involved in approximately 25 European projects. And what we do is to facilitate in all projects the application of methodological approaches to carry out engagement strategies, co-design processes, and evaluation frameworks by using a wide variety of approaches. And you can see some of the approaches here. So we definitely try to apply, when it is feasible and possible, a human-centric design approach. We use a lot the theory of change, design thinking, co-design. We help project partners in setting up living labs, and many other things that I will show you in a moment. So here I will focus a bit more on the main areas that we are working on, so that we try to unpack the human-centric frameworks through the lens of our approach. So how do we focus on human-centric frameworks? So why is the are the human-centric frameworks very relevant for us, and why do we focus on them in the social innovation team? Well, basically there is a direct and very close link between the human-centric frameworks and social innovation, as conceived by the European Commission. So as maybe you are familiar with this definition of the European Commission, in which social innovations are explained as new ideas that meet social needs, create social relationships, and form new collaboration. All these innovations can be products, can be solutions, services, or models. A way to tackle social innovations or to work on them is to integrate, and this is what we do here, social science and humanities in EU-funded projects. Most of the times, the SSH dimension is actually mandatory by the calls. So in the calls from by the European Commission, there are often statements, requirements to have the integration of the SSH disciplines and the involvement of SSH experts in the proposals themselves. And here you can see just a statement copy-pasted from a recent call in which this is very clear. So that this topic requires the effective contribution of SSH. So this is exactly what we do. And the background that we have is sociology. I am a sociologist. In the team, there are sociologists who work to do that in the most robust and structured way as possible. So I will give you a glimpse into how we do it. So basically, this is the core of what we do. So we design and provide strategies which are focused on co-design and co-creation, social requirements and analysis. We do the analysis of social context, the analysis of user requirements. We provide recommendation, and most importantly, what we do in almost all the projects that we are involved in is to provide engagement roadmaps. What do we mean by engagement roadmaps? We mean roadmaps in which it is very clear whom to involve at a local level, in local context, to do what and how. And to give you practical examples, it can be the involvement of citizens to co-create solutions, socio-technical solutions that may be used in their local environment, in their neighborhood. It really depends, of course, on the topics or the topic of the projects we are involved in. But this is what we do. So we provide these strategies, as I said before, in a robust and systematic way. And in order to do that, we rely on engagement methods and tools. So on co-design models, we have a catalog of engagement tools that that have been used in other projects. So we know we have lessons learned and best practices, and we also sometimes offer, when possible, when feasible, ad hoc trainings so that project partners know how to apply methods. Of course, what we also do is that we measure the engagement of the engagement approaches, but not only, we also measure the social impact when requested. So in order to do that, again, we are really focusing on the social and sometimes also environmental indicators and KPIs so that we can evaluate at the end the outputs. The human-centric approach in ICOS and in my team is really captured in this slide. So if you imagine the lifetime of a research project, so the beginning of the project up until the end of the project, all these dimensions are touched upon us. Sometimes all of them, I should add, sometimes not all of them. It really, again, it depends on the role that we have. Sometimes we are work package leaders, sometimes we are only task leaders, so we don't touch upon all these dimensions. But ideally, when we are heavily involved in a project, we start from the beginning. We carry out a context analysis to understand who are the stakeholders involved in, for instance, the co-creation of solutions. So we gain a deeper understanding of the context, and then we don't come up with the objectives of engagement top-down, but we use a bottom-up approach to support partners to define feasible engagement objectives through workshops, focus groups, and other methods that we apply in the project. As I said before, sometimes we also support the development of living labs, including the design of specific governance structure. Before getting here to the development of living labs, Of course, the stakeholder analysis, the stakeholder identification and categorization should be done so that we can then work directly with the stakeholders. And this is the aspect that I was mentioning before. So we come up at the end after having gained a good understanding of the context and after having agreed and discussed with the partners the objectives of engagement. We also come up with engagement strategies and roadmap based, and this is very important, on the how. So co-design models that can be used at a local level for different kind of purposes. And at the end, as I was saying, we are also evaluating what we do. So we work on evaluation frameworks, we do a baseline and ex post analysis, and we develop the monitoring of the KPIs that we have also designed in the projects. To be a bit more practical, and I will be very short here, but just to give you hands-on examples on what we mean by objectives of engagement, because otherwise it's like it's a too theoretical approach or terms that I'm using here. So the objectives of engagement can be very different. It can be that we are involved in guiding the development of technical solutions. And for instance, we are involved in many projects with a topic focused around energy and energy renovation of smart buildings. In this context, what we do is working together with the technical partners involved in the project to understand what they are going to develop and how the residents of the buildings, if this is requested from the project, of course, how they can contribute to the design of the solutions. The same thing also applies to the facilitation of the co-creation of socio-technical solutions. So we can use the same examples. We co-develop also specific, but we help in co-developing specific outputs that can be related to policies as well, such as policies and guidelines in different kind of projects, for instance, in health projects. And also we co-define, again, it's not a definition by ourselves, the definition of evaluation objectives, and we validate the KPIs, key performance indicators, with the partners. And here you can have a glimpse again into what participatory processes, social acceptance, and project social outcomes and impact really entail, and some of the guiding questions that we take into account. So for the participatory processes, it's very important for us to understand to what extent the engagement strategies designed within the project have achieved the intended objectives. For the social acceptance, and this is also something that we are increasingly focusing on in the projects, to what extent is the product or the technology or intervention being accepted by the users? And for the social impact and project outcomes, to what extent an outcome has achieved its intended objective. So you can see that it's a very complex job that we have, especially if we are involved, as I said before, from the beginning up until the end of the project, which means that we have to get to here to evaluate what has been done. And now I just want to wrap up to give you an overview on what we think is the significance of the human-centric frameworks in R&I, and especially what are the most important dimensions that we have seen in many projects now, and which are sometimes requested or mandatory in the calls, in the European Commission calls. Well, first, user understanding is very important. So we put a lot of effort in all the projects that we are involved in to understand people's needs and requirements from the very onset, and to engage stakeholders. So here I put only one example, of course, but we don't carry out only interviews. It really depends on, again, the methods that we are using in a specific project and the objectives as well. Inclusivity and diversity. Again, this is something that is often mandatory, required. So we ensure that all perspectives, backgrounds, and needs are considered, and the solutions are accessible and equitable for diverse groups. Co-creation and participation are keywords more often increasingly used, again, in the descriptions of the calls. And this means involving the stakeholders in the decision-making and in the design processes, and encouraging collaboration to create solutions that reflects the needs of the users. Measuring the impact of what you are doing in a project. If you use a human-centric framework is very important. So assessing whether the solution meets the needs, if they are happy with them, and also what we normally do in the project is to ensure that there is a feedback loops and that there is an iterative approach so that when users share a feedback on the solutions, then the technical partners really integrate the feedback from the users. And this is all from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chiara, for a nice presentation here, and to the audience again. If you have any questions to Chiara for the Q&A session later on in this webinar, please note them down so you have them ready. So next up is our third and last speaker for today. That's John there. And he's going to speak about finding a new vocabulary for human-centric policy making. So the floor is yours, John.
Thanks very much. Okay, so I think, yeah, today I'm just going to try and talk through kind of 3 stages a little bit about how we got to where we are in the way that research and innovation is thought about, not just in Europe, but I mean, really globally. Then start thinking about why we need to change that. And I think some of those points have been addressed by colleagues who've given their presentations already. And then maybe think a little bit about how we can go about actually implementing some of those changes, what that might look like. So before I dive into it, I mean, today I'm really here representing the European Alliance for Social Science and Humanities. I won't go into this too much, other than to say we're kind of an advocacy group for ensuring that that human-centric dimension of research and innovation programs really is meaningful inside European funding and member states, and is a really meaningful presence in policy making. Because I think what I'm going to talk about over the next few minutes is that there are recognitions and good intentions from policy making to think more clearly about how we can involve that human-centric approach. But sometimes the outcomes, the policy measures, the approaches are not entirely successful in giving us the outcomes we want. So I'm going to take a bit of a step back quickly just to say something really about how we get here. How did we get to where we are today, particularly in thinking about policy making and thinking about things like business level, firm level strategies. So there's certainly a long history of thinking about what is it that makes a successful economy. Okay, in the post-war period, the OECD was charged with looking at which countries were recovering better from war conditions and accelerating fastest in its economic growth. And they developed something called the Frascati Manual, which is essentially a method for looking at what measures in a national context and national policy context have been producing faster growth outcomes for those economies. And certainly after in the period through the 1950s through into the 1960s, this was really based just on lots of input measures about how much money countries spent on research and innovation expenditure through their research councils or their funding programs, how many research and development staff they had. In later years, that starts to be developed to think about not just public investment, but what's the private sector investment in R&D across those different forms of research into innovation, basic, applied, and then experimental. It's not until we're much closer to the current period that this process starts to not just look at national policies. National policies can frame the work that's happening in a country and how policy making influences things. But we also needed to look at what is actually being interpreted and implemented at the level of individual businesses, at the firms, or at business sector levels. And I think what's important to start capturing from this first slide is how much the measures of success, the way that we assess whether we're being successful in our innovation, are very quantitative, and they're based around indicators like sales or productivity growth or patents and licenses or machinery equipment. It's very technological. It's very financially driven. So I think that's what I mean when I was talking about looking for a new vocabulary. It's how some of the definitions that we've picked up from these historic policy movements or influences, the way that policymakers have tried to influence businesses in their countries, that the vocabulary of that evaluation has had a very long and clear history, and it is based on economic measures and technological measures. So when we're thinking about human-centric approaches, you can immediately start to see how it's undervalued, and it becomes a little less visual or visible in those kinds of assessment areas, even down to the level of what is the purpose of a business. Through the 50s and the 60s into the 70s, influential academics, somebody like Milton Friedman, wrote a famous, or depending on your perspective, notorious article in the New York Times in the 1970s, who rationalized that the purpose of a business is solely and entirely to increase its profits. And again, we see that the vocabulary, the language of how we assess success is driven by quite clear economic measures. And I think that what we have to realize is that if we wanted to bring about some change, and I'll say something about why it might be important, we have to realize that we have a very long legacy of use of this type of language in assessment and evaluation and thinking about what innovation and innovation success might look like and how we measure it, because of these influences from at the policy making level from OECD and at the firm level from thinking by people like Milton Friedman. And even today, in say certainly in the UK and in the US, if you're a company director, one of your director's obligations to your shareholders is to look after and measure the increase in profits. You have little other responsibilities, and I think that conversation is starting to move on, but painfully slowly. So looking now for examples of, as colleagues have talked about, there are programs which are emerging at national level and at European level, which have tried to incorporate and support and help to invest in research and innovation activities, which might take on a more human-centric approach. Chiara mentioned that in the framework program, probably at the tail end of Horizon 2020 and certainly through Horizon Europe, that social science and humanities dimension has been expected and flagged up in the different calls across the different topics in the research program. Whether or not that's been successful, I'd refer you to a couple of nice papers that EASSH have put out in the last few years discussing that. But I wanted to focus on what's happening in the European Innovation Council, the main seat of sort of European Union aggregation of policy thinking around how to stimulate innovation across the European Union. And what I'm sort of flagging here is that the European Innovation Council reflects a lot more that history of how we think about what is the successful innovation policy, how to measure it, how to understand what it looks like. When you look into the evaluation criteria that they use for selecting the businesses or the investments that they want to make, again, the criteria rest on things like technology readiness levels at the high end, but again, it's technology related. It's still using language like market share, which again is a very quantified economic measure and reflects a lot more of the kind of thinking of people like Milton Friedman and neoliberal economists from the 60s and the 70s than the kinds of policies that we hear policymakers talking about across the EU today. Business strategies looking at profitability. So I think we are still prisoners, I think, of that 60-year history of policy making and business strategy and business thinking that certainly in my university, I'm sure we still teach in our business and in management courses, literature which reflects that kind of history. So if that's where we're coming from, why is it that we need to think about changes? Well, I'd like to sort of posit the suggestion that there has been a lot of good research work which highlights that actually, in terms of let's call it the well-being or the happiness of citizens and communities and societies across the world, a really poor indicator of the happiness or the well-being levels measurable in a country is something like economic growth or GDP, or maybe at the level of the individual firm, that the profitability. So I think we are recognizing that those policies which may have been correct for a different period of time in the development of European countries and European societies, through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, we need something very different now to frame the way we understand what is of value, what is beneficial to society, alongside some of the more traditional measures that we've got. And for anybody who has the time, I'd always recommend a former colleague, Richard Layard's book on happiness from 2005, which goes a very long way to, from an economist's perspective, admitting how economics hasn't always been entirely useful as a toolkit to understanding the way that we need to think about benefits to society, and that we need to think about some other ways of measuring or assessing value and benefit. So we turn to the human-centric approach. Now, I will admit that having looked at a lot of the literature about what is human-centric innovation, I actually turned to some technology to help me out. So this is my AI-assisted summary of what is human-centric innovation. Not all technological tools need to be seen as detrimental and barriers to us making progress. But I think, these really do reflect the kinds of additional assessment, dimensions that we need to think about. Chiara and both colleagues have been speaking about how we need to engage a lot more with communities, with beneficiaries, with thinking about what the value and wider benefits of our activities could be. Certainly engaging people with in the co-creation of business ideas, and thinking about how we develop innovative both technologies but also innovative processes around more socially driven innovations, I think are really important. Now, while I think we can all agree that we have these objectives, we want to move in this direction, one thing that I would say is that, of course, we will still need to be able to think about how we assess the effectiveness. And because we've had this 60-year history of measuring a certain set of criteria, we are well set up to collect that data and to use that data in a form which is comfortable for our analysis. What we really need to do is invest now in thinking about how we can start collecting and developing new forms of data and new forms of evidence, which don't rely on entirely economic measures or GDP growth measures, and accept that this is going to require time and investment. But unless we start collecting new forms of data and think about new forms of testimony from our communities on a more qualitative basis and integrate that into the way that we understand the contribution of firms and businesses, we'll struggle to break out of that history, that cycle of history that we've been subject to for the last 60 years. So I don't have any more solutions than it's going to be, we radically need to reshape our information environment, and we need to invest in that quite significantly. Thank you.
And thank you, John, for an interesting presentation. Which also means that we have come to the Q&A part of this webinar. I hope there's a lot of you in the audience have noted down questions for the speakers. So, and you can notify us about that in several ways. You can use the raise hand function in Zoom. Then you are using this react button. You'll find the buttons at the bottom of your screen, or you can also write questions in the chat if you like that. Who'll be the first one? Don't be shy. Yes, Johannes.
Thank you, Dag, and thank you for the presentation. I think it's and maybe I think I didn't make that clear enough in the beginning, and the other presentation triggered that again. I think we need to have a look at why we want that. Why do we want to have a human-centric approach in the first place? I think that is just that our not only our vocabulary, but our structures, our funding frameworks are not built at the moment to address human or societal challenges enough. We have that in Horizon Europe with the missions and the partnership to some extent, but again, there's much more required to provide formats or to develop new funding frameworks which significantly support a human-centric approach, not for the sake of the human-centric approach, but for addressing these challenges in the first place. I think, John, you brought some very interesting historic facts of how we got here. Now it's about how to dismantle that and how to use new approaches to what an economy might mean for us. What can it mean? I think at the moment what I observe is we are bouncing back into a direction on a European level where we might not want to go, where economic growth is again king and all the other important issues are not that relevant anymore. That's just one reflection that I think it is essential that when we ask the question why we want to do it, it's not a nice to have, it's an absolute necessity to go into that direction.
Thank you, Johannes. Next hand up is from Jacob.
Yes, thanks for the presentations and for the opportunity to ask some questions. My first question goes to Johannes regarding the Driving Urban Transitions program. I would be interested in how you organize mutual learning across governance levels, so European level, national, regional, local. I saw the example you showed from the policy paper. I would be interested if you could talk a little bit more how you try to, organize mutual learning from the experience you make and across those sectors. And then my second question would be around stakeholder involvement. If any of the three of you or anyone else in the room has interesting examples for quintuple helix stakeholder approaches, because I'm doing a bit of research supporting your colleague Simone in the Era Fabric project. So that's why I'm looking for examples. Thanks.
Yeah, who would like to start?
Shall I go, Doug?
Yeah.
Yeah,
great.
Just very brief because we are running out of time. I think we try to do that by all the additional activities beyond the calls which we fund. So the calls in DUT are, of course, the central issues, but we have different formats where we bring people together to exchange. Either it could be a policy conference, it could be our agoras where we have workshops where people meet and exchange knowledges, build capacities, eventually, hopefully, and exchange knowledges. And so for me, the essential part is developing this kind of arenas, this kind of frameworks where people can exchange. We had, for example, a webinar where we put together people from the European Commission with the doers. It was a great discussion because these people would usually not meet. So I think for me, it is making it possible that people exchange. I think that's essential. Oh, it runs until the 12:30. That's good to tell me. We have plenty of time.
Yeah.
I was almost off to lunch.
Yeah,
No,
I'm
kidding.
No,
Sorry.
no worries, no lunch yet. So what about you, Chiara or John? Would you have any viewpoints?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Doug, and thank you for the question, Jakob. For the quadruple helix approach, this is something that we use a lot. But again, as I said before, sorry to be a bit redundant here, but it really depends on the aims, of the objectives of the project, and also of the context. Normally, this kind of approach works really well when you work in projects in which there are clusters, for instance. When there are clusters at a local level, or even at a regional level, in which you can really discuss with public authorities on the one hand, industries, academia, and citizens, then it works. What we normally do before starting engaging with this kind of stakeholders is really taking deep dives into the context to understand who is involved in specific clusters and whether we can engage with all these different types of stakeholders using tailored methods. This is also something that is very important and I didn't mention before. So what we do when we come up with strategies of engagement is to tailor the strategies based on the stakeholders we are working with. As an example, very practical example, if we are in a project in which, again, sorry to make again this example of energy, the main topic is energy and the renovation of a building. In this building, there are mainly old people. Of course, you cannot use digital tools or only to some extent in order to carry out the co-creation. You have to come up with tailored approaches based on the needs and the requirements of the users. I don't know if I replied to your question, Jakob, but the first part, I think it addresses the question that you had in mind.
Yeah, some nodding from Jakob at least. What about you, John?
Yes. So I'm also thinking about we're talking a lot this morning about almost as feeling as though we're always in the context of funded projects and funded programs. But I think a lot of these approaches and methods have relevance if you're starting a business, right? So having said that, we need to move away for some old vocabularies, but a lot of co-creation is like market research. So if you're thinking about you're setting up a business and looking for investment funding, you want to make a case for why your business exists. Whereas in this case, we want to interact a lot more with social beneficiaries of your business to make your case. That evidence then has to be used and usable in the context of where you're going to find investment and investors to run a commercial proposition. So we don't just have to think about how we do this in a kind of a publicly supported context. Though to get some change, I think, public investment is going to be absolutely necessary. But there's no harm that we can't use some of these methods inside a business context as well.
Thank you, John. Next question up is from Maria Grazia.
Yes, hello. I would like to put the questions, point of interest, about the possibilities to valorize the social impact, the human impact of our activities. I mean, I think it is important to identify some KPIs in order to understand how much does it cost a social impact. And so we can translate in economic advantage some social actions. So I think it is important try to stress the economic impacts of social actions. Because in any case, for example, if you have a good health, you can save money in hospitals, in medicines, and so on. So if you have a good environment, if you stay well, it's easier for you also to avoid some kind of costs. So I think it can be important also, this economic valorization of the social impacts. What do you think about it?
Good question. Who would like to start? John?
Yeah, so I do take the point that there is a sort of a pressure on us to look at those economic values, but I think certainly there are a lot of good approaches from social research, which I think we should be deploying a lot more to understanding what those social benefits are. So when we do a lot of policy experimentation, okay, so the kind of methods which are used to valorize the effectiveness of a policy can be used in the same way to valorize the benefits of a more sort of business orientated set of activities. Okay, so I think that when we're thinking about using innovations in policy making, we have lots of methods and methodologies which can be used in the same way that you're talking about. Okay, not just health outcomes, but education outcomes, participation rates in social programs. So I think there's a whole spread of public policy areas that we are already collecting evidence and doing research on, and those methods are there for us to use in an innovation context to make a different set of cases. So I'm not too concerned that we don't have some of the tools and methods to do it. We're just a little bit too focused on only being able to measure it with economic benefit.
Thank you. What about you, Johannes or Chiara? Would you have any viewpoints?
I share that perspective. So I think we cannot. I think you might be able, if you have, let's say, an outcome, you might be able to sell it as a this has an economic benefit because it might have to has one, but not all, at least not our in our activities in the urban context. It's a lot of about different governance models and so on. You know, there might be an economic benefit behind it, but it might also be just, you know, bringing people together, bringing their interests together, having a conversation and co-creating better outcomes for a neighborhood, for, you know, mobility services in the neighborhood, public spaces. There might not be an economic incentive in there. It's just a bringing people together to share ideas, knowledges, being creative by doing so, having a kind of democratic angle also to it, because you bring different voices together. Where so I would be a bit hesitant to only measure it in economic impact.
Yeah, thank you. What about you, Chiara? Are you supporting
Yeah,
that?
yes, absolutely, fully. As a sociologist, of course, I'm fully aligned with John and with Johannes, so I don't have anything to add there. For me, the social impact is really revolving more about not really the economic, or not only the economic dimensions, but also other benefits, as also Johannes was referring to. For instance, we are doing a lot of work in projects in which the regeneration of neighborhoods is really all about the co-creation of solutions revolving around mobility, revolving around transport, and there the social impact is really not measured in terms of economic.
Yeah, thank you. I also got a question in the chat here that goes to all three of you. And that is, how do you think that putting more effort into the human centricity of research and innovation will affect the EU's competition with, for instance, the United States? And also a note here on the question is that there's an understanding that they do not appear to attribute much value to anything beyond profit. So would you agree with that assumption in the end there? And also, do you have any reflections on the competitiveness of the EU taking this perspective into the equation? Yeah, John?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think this is where we need to think about, like I was talking about before, some of the work which is done by people like Richard Layard on happiness and well-being, and think about concepts like what is a healthy society. Okay, and that you know, it takes us to be a little braver. You know, it's like jumping off the edge of the diving board. There's a moment of anticipation where you are nervous that you're throwing yourself into something new, but the benefit of it is going to be much more significant. So I would ask the question what do we think a healthier society and a happier society looks like? And I think there is good evidence to say that, like I was saying before, what's it called? It's called the Easterlin paradox, that GDP growth over time does not track with happiness surveys of populations. The richer we get, we are not getting any happier. And I think that's why we have the pressure to think about change. Okay, and that's thinking about a healthier society. So yeah, do your own thought experiment as to whether or not we think European communities can be healthier societies than the US at the moment.
Thank you. Any other viewpoints?
I just because I found it very interesting. I saw it yesterday somewhere on social media. It was yesterday or the day before yesterday. I think it was by the New York Times that had different graphics. Where in the first graph it was the GDP growth of the US, which went up significantly over the last years and was much more than in Europe. And all the other graphs were related to suicide rates, happiness, and so on, and they were all declining. So I'm That was just something triggered by what you just said, John, that we might want to think of the purpose of research and innovation or of our work, not in terms of GDP growth only, but in terms of other measures. And that brings us back to why we want to have research innovation. In our case, in the program, we are very much driven by the societal challenges and addressing those. There might be a GDP component or, let's say, economic component in there. It might not be the big industries involved. It might be smaller, medium-sized enterprises. It might be neighborhood initiatives or neighborhood businesses. It might be the creative sector. It might be the arts. There's so many different let's say, actors who have a stake in urban development, where, of course, there's big players who also play the game, the Siemens and the Philips and all the big IBM companies. But I think in the last 10 years, also with the smart city approach, we kind of learned, especially since the pandemic, to move away a little bit from this extremely tech-driven forms of, let's say, urban development. I think that the pandemic showed us a little bit. This focus moved away towards the human-centric approach. Just some thoughts on that.
What about you, Chiara?
Again, no additional, thoughts and ideas. I think that the framing that John used is very important in this context, meaning the focus on what it means to live in a society that is healthier and happier. Well, as he said many times, sometimes this is not related to the market or to business strategies or whatever. There are also societal values that should be taken into account when working on R&I. When working human-centric approaches within R&I. So I really, well, my question would be actually what it really means to be competitive, to be honest. And I think that we should rethink perhaps what it means to be competitive in the current situation in this world. Sometimes, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I guess you lost me. Can you hear me? Okay, I thought that you lost me because my internet is a bit unstable. So as I said, to be a bit provocative, I really think that we should rethink or reflect upon what it means to be competitive today and what's the long-term vision. So where we are heading to in terms of Europe as opposed to other countries like the US. But it's a very complex discussion. So I don't have the answer to the question, to be honest. We would need one day to discuss only this.
Yeah. It's a big discussion on do you want to compete and what is competition and with whom and with ourselves. Yeah. So on. So we have time for more questions. Anyone in the audience wants to ask a question? Yes, Jacob.
Yeah, if that's sorry, if that's okay, then I'll pose another one. Thanks, Chiara, for your response. If I got it correctly, you thought about the quadruple helix approach, and I was wondering if for you it makes a difference to think in the quintuple helix approach. I'm not sure if I posed my question in the beginning right. I was referring to the quintuple helix approach and whether that makes a difference for you in how you engage the project. Yeah, and also if there are any interesting examples to look into these differences.
Yeah. Well, actually, we in all the projects that we have been involved in right now, we have been focusing mainly on the quadruple helix approach. So I cannot really refer to examples in which we use any other approaches, to be honest. So I don't have lessons learned or best practices on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chiara. Any other questions? Or yeah, replies? Johannes?
I think I can respond to Jakob briefly. I just thought before we ran out of time, but we didn't. So quintuple helix, you mean having nature part of that discussion as well, right? So I share, besides my work in DUT, I work with a couple of cities in other European programs where I'm an expert working with them on innovative action. Is from the funded by the structural funds. And I work with the city of Mechelen in Belgium, who does really, really cool stuff. So they have a river through the, if you have a minute, I explain that. They have a river through the medieval old town, and this river is very cut off from the public spaces. So the public space is cut off from the river. So they want to reconnect that with measures of biodiversity and having different, let's say, the voices of nature also reflected in this process. And just to give you a little bit of a teaser, what they did, they developed in a very long process a citizen panel with experts so they went around with a citizen panel with very diverse people who were randomly selected, and biologists and other experts explained them who actually lives in the city beyond humans. What are the plants and the native animals living there? And then in this process in the work of the citizen assembly, they took on different personas, or a couple of participants took on different personas and brought in the interests of this, let's say, more than human inhabitants of Mechelen to this process. And I know that the city was very scared in the beginning of if that would work, if the citizen assembly would just say like, what is this? Why should I be a bat now or so? But it worked extremely well. And this is one example for this quintuple helix, which I find very, very interesting. And I find it fascinating that local public administrations go this way now and dare to take this step. And also that links a little bit to a comment which I had, or a question I had before. If we talk about the human-centric approach, is that actually what we want? Because if we have all these societal challenges and all these, climate change, it's human-made. Biodiversity crisis is human-made. If we talk about the human-centric approach, we should be also a bit cautious on how we interpret that. Do we interpret that as our impact on the ecosystems on the planet, or do we interpret it as in we do research innovation for nurturing human needs that might go against all the planetary boundaries and so on? Just some thoughts on that.
Thank you. Johannes. Any other question? I haven't seen any in the chat, new ones, but anyone wants to have the chance to ask a question? Or comment on something that has been said, that's also possible. No, I have one question myself that we have to take quite shortly. But Chiara, you mentioned a lot of different projects that you worked on. So would you like to give us a few examples of projects that you think could be inspirational, or provide examples of the discussions today?
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much, Doug, for the question. I will mainly focus on topics without really getting into the nitty-gritty details of the projects, because we don't have time for it. However, I just wanted to provide an example that actually revolves around not necessarily the involvement of the citizens, because this is another aspect that we should consider. When we talk about human-centric approach, more often than not, we think about the involvement of citizens, or these are the most used examples. However, for instance, we are involved in a quite a big project which revolves around the development of robots in the context of robots applied to solar panels. So robots which are used for maintenance and cleaning. So it's the AI applied to the maintenance and cleaning of the robots. And what are we doing there? We are focusing on the humans in the loop. And in that kind of frame, the humans in the loop are the workers. So what we are doing in that context is to understand the potential impact of robots who can substitute also. They can substitute the humans working already in some context to perform a work that they normally perform. So to understand their perspective, the social acceptance, and also to understand, to have them in the loop in terms of the testing of the robots. In this kind of context, for instance, you cannot expect that robots are co-created fully and entirely, but what is really important is to take into account their views, the views of the workers during the development processes of the robots. And this actually lead me to another point that I only raised before, but I think it's very important in order to come up with good and robust human-centric approaches is key to understand the technical components. Otherwise, there can be quite a huge misalignment between the human or the humans in the loop involved and the technical components which are being developed in different kind of context and of frames.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we have also some time for some more questions. I saw some,
just last questions about the importance of communication, dissemination about the positive results of your activities, just to increase the propensity of the citizens, the workers, to be involved in this kind of processes, because I know it is not so easy to involve the people in some discussion panels, co-working sessions, live in labs, and so on. But if they understood that they can achieve some results in a not so long term, but also I think it is important also to provide some case study of successful experience, just to encourage the participation in this process. What do you think about this?
Yeah, Chiara.
Thank you, Maria Grazia. This is a very relevant point, and we are lucky enough to have within ICONS a science communication unit, which actually deals with communication and dissemination. So we know that this link is very important. Carrying out local engagement does not really work if you don't have effective communication strategies, not only to communicate the results, as you said, Maria Grazia, which is very important, but you also have to communicate beforehand the processes, what you're going to do with the local stakeholders in order to co-create or in order to regenerate a neighborhood or to co-create socio-technical solutions. So communication is very important to enhance the involvement strategies and to communicate the results at the end, as you said. One thing which is often not really taken into account is the language in which we communicate. And because we are involved in European projects in which the main language is English, sometimes we take for granted that also the engagement should be in English and the results communicated in English only, which is a big mistake from my point of view. You cannot really carry out any kind of engagement strategies if you don't use the native language of the people who really understand and work in a specific context in which maybe English is not the native language, And the same applies to communication and dissemination activities. We should be both in English if you work like us in a European project, of course, but also using the local language so that people feel really a bit more engaged.
Thank you, Chiara. We in this webinar we've also been asked by our colleagues in the Era Fabric project to ask you all of you in the audience to also reply to a simple feedback form. So I think Asa will bring that up if you could set aside a few minutes for that. But I'll also now say a big thank you to all of the three speakers here today for interesting presentations and also discussions afterwards. And also to you in the audience for participating, and in particular you that ask questions that really foster the discussions here today. So thank you again, and please also consider answering the evaluation survey. We have 5 minutes here at the end of the webinar, at least, to complete that. There's a QR code that you can scan with your phone, and there's also a link, but it's not clickable, so perhaps we should paste it in the chat. What do you think, Asa or Elisa? See if I can bring it there as well. Paste it in the chat here. There. Then the link is also in the chat. So, but otherwise, thank you for today, for presenting and for attending the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.